let's cross live now to our political panel. On the left, we have Ellie Mae O'Hagan. She's the director of the Class think tank, Centre for Labour and Social Studies. On the right, political reporter at Reaction, Bill Bowkett. Both join me now. Evening to you both.
Good evening.
Thanks for taking the time to talk to us here on Talk Radio. Let's talk about the Prime Minister's press conference, the 6-point plan that he came up with over the weekend. I mean, was any of that worth listening to? Was the 6-point plan actually anything of substance, or was it more just waffle and spin? Bill, I'll start with you.
Well, it's kind of hilarious in that New York Times article where he outlined his 6-point plan, talking about platitudes, that he actually used a platitude himself in that warm platitudes about rule-based international order is over. But it has seemed that from the press conference that we just saw with the Prime Minister, with Mark Rutte, and also with Justin Trudeau, that he is kind of keeping his money where his mouth is. So, of course, one of the big points was that there needs to be more unity and support from the West to support people with Ukraine, and the government has just announced £175 million more in additional humanitarian aid, bringing the total to around 400 million. And there does seem to be a united front also from Western leaders, Trudeau, Rutte, and also the Prime Minister is going to be holding hosting further audiences with leaders of Poland, Slovakia, those basically on the front line neighbouring Ukraine at the centre of this crisis, and also leading on the economic front. The Prime Minister has been very open about how he was the one who took the battle line on banning Russia and Russian banks from the SWIFT program, for instance, and also imposing economic
sanctions. But the 6-point plan that he came up with was all the things we're doing already. I mean, there was nothing new in it. Why was he...
I suppose it was more to kind of solidify his position, and I think among the kind of the wider scale within that. And I think I think one position I think that Boris Johnson feels that other countries aren't taking a tough line on is on defence, for instance. So when the crisis kind of emerged in the first place in around January, Ben Wallace, Defence Secretary, is very open about giving lethal assistance and also, logistical operations to Volodymyr Zelensky. And now you're starting to see, for instance, with the Dutch and Mark Rutte, they're now going to be giving 200 Stinger missiles, and also other European nations like Germany in putting more funds towards anti-tank weapons and stronger defences to combat Russia's aggression in Ukraine.
All right. So, Ellie Mae, we've led the way. Boris Johnson, it wasn't really a 6-point plan. It was more an affirming of where we are already. And the press conference was showing that he was leading from the front. More money to go in aid. And also, we should say as well, a full review of our energy as well, where that's going to come from. So, all good stuff, Ellie Mae.
Well, I'd agree with Bill that it was more of he's communicating more where he is rather than actually announcing anything new. I think that's a good way of summarising it. Personally, I actually think the government's position is not bad on this. I think the bit that I'm quite disappointed by is how slowly the government is moving when it comes to addressing Russian money in this country. So I'll give you an example. 500 Russians control the wealth of 40% of Russia. So if you were to make a significant dent into that, you could actually really cause problems for Putin. And in this country, we know that we have a lot of Russian money in London. And just to give you an example, in Westminster, around 10% of properties are held by offshore companies. Now, not all of that will be Russian money, but some will. And actually, if we start to make a dent here, if we start to address the issue of Russian money in London, then we can really cause problems for Putin. And at the moment, we have sanctions that are kind of hurting ordinary Russians. You were talking earlier about Russophobia being a bad thing. And I think that's not really fair. I think we should actually hit Putin where it hurts, which is the wealthiest Russians who can stand to lose a bit of cash. I think, and I'd like to see the government going harder and faster on that, because at the moment we're behind the EU and the US on that, and we're giving people like Roman Abramovich far too much time to offload their assets.
I think that's actually a pretty fair summary. I mean, Bill, we did lead the way when it came to trying to get those sanctions on banks, trying to get that SWIFT process, the SWIFT banking process, trying to get that taken off. But Ellie Mae does make a good point when it comes to those individuals. We are dragging our feet, and many people might make the point that the reason that the UK is dragging their feet on individuals with massive amounts of Russian wealth is because many of them have donated to the Tory party. What would you say to that, Bill?
I think that's a fair assessment, Cristo. I think the government are taking action, at least on oligarchs. So right now in the House of Commons, they're currently debating the economic crime bill, which is being accelerated through the procedures. One thing that does slightly confuse me is why this 6-month transition periods that should the legislation be approved, and I think it will, because Keir Starmer has voiced his approval for the legislation. This 6-month transition period, which would allow the likes, as Ellie said, of Roman Abramovich and other influential Russian oligarchs to put their assets outside of the United Kingdom, giving them basically leeway to for not being sanctioned. But happily, there's a motion, an amendment being tabled by the veteran Tory MP David Davis, which would essentially freeze those assets during that review period into whether individual Russian oligarchs should be sanctioned. And happily, there seems to be support on both sides of the House on that. So I think that while Boris Johnson might like to claim that he is a leading force on the issue of Ukraine, maybe more on the international front, domestically he hasn't done shine himself in total glory on oligarchs.
Are we perhaps as well, I mean, just picking up on that point of Russophobia, when there is an attack in the name of radical Islam, we're very, very quick to say we must not blame everyone of the Islamic faith. When COVID was coming out of China, we were very careful. We cannot be Chinaphobic. It doesn't represent all people from China. There does seem to be a more acceptable narrative, though, when it comes to this, that this is Russia, it's Russians. Why is that? Why is it that we're not being, that there is a perception we're not being as careful when it comes to this? Ellie Mae, what do you say?
Well, I'm not sure, to be honest, that we've been careful on other occasions. So we know that during COVID, there was a rise in hate crimes for amongst people who are Asian. And, there's been research that shows that the majority of news stories about Muslims in this country are negative, that portraying Muslims in a negative light. So I actually think this is a problem that we have. I agree with you that this is a problem in terms of how people are talking about ordinary Russians. But I don't think it is isolated. But I definitely agree with your point that it's something that we shouldn't do for
I'm not seeing the chorus
of
outrage about that in the way in which we see it about other minorities when this happens. And I don't know, Bill, would that be fair to say or not?
No, I think there has been a lot of outcry. I mean, so I've just moved house. I've just moved to London, and one of my housemates is Russian. And he's got a Ukrainian girlfriend, and he said that he's just been experiencing undue amounts of discrimination if he were to ever speak, cryptic Russian in public. And I think there's a recognition, at least among young people, that Russophobia does exist. And actually, thankfully, a lot of people have spoken out about some, for instance, on businesses like Compare the Market from dropping like the Meerkat advert, or from theatres from dropping Russian-inspired ballets. I think that's been pretty obvious. I think discrimination in that sense, it could be quite subtle, and some people can take it well. But I think actually, if you speak to, I think it's crucial that we get that message across. I think there is not a correlation between. When we refer to the Russians, we're referring to an institution in Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, because, I mean, I'm not sure, is it helpful to drop a Russian performer, for instance? Because that does go into the... If you were to drop a Muslim performer after an Islamic terror attack, there would be absolute outrage. Whereas you drop a Russian performer when there is a war happening in the name of Russia, and everyone says, oh, well, yeah, it's understandable. I've not seen much outrage about that. So there is a double standard happening, isn't there?
Well, yeah, I think it's important to distinguish that those that have no direct ties or links to the Kremlin absolutely should not be experiencing Russophobia or for being dropped plainly because of their nationality. But when you have instances where people are in positions in authority or in very public positions, but have made their financial stability comes from, ties to Vladimir Putin, that's understandable. So I think the one thing is justifiable is the devil needs to be in the Formula One driver for Haas, who just recently got dropped.
The devil needs to perhaps be a little bit more into the detail. This is Cristo in for Jeremy Kyle at Drive on Talk Radio with Skills for Life. Unlock your potential, learn the skills or get the qualifications you need to get you the job you want. Search Skills for Life. Coming up, well, we're going to talk about this referendum for net zero and our lack of energy security as well. And that's coming up here on Talk Radio.
Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV. The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
But another aspect, of course, of what we've seen as a result of what's been happening in Ukraine is energy prices going up and more of us being exposed to the fact that we do not have energy security here in the UK. Well, Ellie Mae O'Hagan is director of the class think tank. Bill Bowkett is a political reporter. They both join me for my panel. What do you think about the idea of a referendum as put forward by the Talk Radio presenter Richard Tice over the weekend into our obsession with net zero? Ellie Mae, what say you?
Well, I think, if you look at what ordinary people think and if you look at what political parties think, there is a big consensus that we need to do something about climate change, and most of your listeners and viewers will believe that. So I think a referendum on net zero is actually quite a fringe radical position that not many people share. And I do think that it's a giant waste of time to discuss, because let's remember that this government won the election by having, in part, they had a net zero in their manifesto. So really that question has already been settled. And so what I think this is a distraction from the fact that, as you said, we don't have any energy insecurity. And look what's happening now. We are part financing Putin's war chest because of our reliance on oil. And actually,
Sorry, Ellie, I'm just going to jump in there, because we are financing his war chest because we are not using our own energy resources ourselves, and because we are trying to have so much of our energy coming from renewables, which just aren't reliable enough, and we don't have the technology yet to be able to store a lot of that renewable energy. We spoke to an energy expert last week saying that electricity needs to be at an absolute constant 50 gigahertz in order to be supplied on the grid, and our renewables mean we don't do that, which means we have to take it from other countries. So it's trying to get to net zero, which is creating this problem.
That's not true at all. In fact, a lot of the oil and gas that we drill for in this country goes to other countries. So actually, that might not even help our energy problem. And, most of the world scientists now agree that the reason why we haven't taken action on climate change is nothing to do with technology. It's to do with politics. So what a referendum would do would be to delay that question even more. And actually, the majority of people in this country, however they voted, whatever else they believe, do agree that we need to take action on climate change in order to make life better for our children and grandchildren. And it's politics getting in the way of that. It's not technology. And now is the time to act. And Bill, I believe that most sensible people watching this will agree with that.
Bill, most sensible people will agree. Most people want net zero, and this just has to happen. It's politics getting in the way.
No, that's totally the case. That's majority of public think that measures need to be put in place to tackle climate change. That is totally understandable. I would take issue in saying that there isn't a consensus. In fact, there was a poll done by YouGov back in October, and if you remove the category for don't knows, 58% of those surveyed said that they would support a referendum on net zero measures. So in that sense, I can understand the appetite. But personally, I can't see how a net zero referendum would exactly work. Would there be a draft bill that would be done by all political parties to tackle climate change? I'm not quite sure how that would work. We don't want to sow more toxic divisions and also uncertainties around net zero and the measures needed to put in place to combat global warming. But the other issue is that the planet is constantly evolving. Projections by the IPCC and also the United Nations around climate change alter constantly. So really having a referendum, let's say over the next few years, might do more damage than it would good, because we would be acting too fast in a sense to combat climate change, which if the net zero measures that were outlined in COP26 were to be put in place, would do more damage, at least economically, to ordinary working families than it would the middle class. So I don't see logistically how it works. And also, we're in the middle of a bloody conflict in Eastern Europe. There may be also regime change going on in Number 10 over the next few months, should Boris Johnson's position as Prime Minister becomes untenable. And I feel if there were to be a commitment to a referendum, I feel it would be best if it's done placed in a manifesto, for instance, like the Conservative Party did in 2015 election, when they put as a manifesto promise that we would have a Brexit referendum. It only seems logical.
All right.
That there should be a commitment like that.
Very nice and civilised political panel this evening. It's just the way I like it. Thank you, Ellie Mae O'Hagan and Bill Bowkett. When we come